It is September 1980 and war has broken out in the Middle East. Iran, weakened by internal chaos in the wake of the Islamic Revolution, is under attack from Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Thousands of troops and hundreds of tanks are pouring across the border, and in the south, Iraqi forces advance with their sights set on controlling the key oil facilities east of the city of Khorramshahr. But what is supposed to be an easy and quick victory against much weaker forces soon becomes a nightmare. The war between Iraq and Iran that broke out in 1980 had at its heart a border dispute that went back decades. Where the two nations met the Gulf, they were separated by a river known as the Shatt al-Arab. And in 1937, a British-led agreement set the border between the two nations at the low tide line on the eastern side, placing most of the river in Iraq. This was incredibly important to the Iraqis, as this was their only access to the sea, but it was a sore point for the Iranians. The issue flared up again after Britain withdrew its troops from the Middle East in 1971, leaving a power vacuum in the region. Iran's monarch, the Shah Reza Pahlavi, saw an opportunity. With the encouragement of the United States, he soon set his sights on becoming the Middle East's leading power. After the 1973 oil crisis, Iran was flush with increased revenues, so could embark on a large armaments program. They procured American F-14s and British Chieftain tanks among much else, and began to put pressure on their smaller western neighbour. Iraq at this time was trying to contain a Kurdish insurgency in the north of the country, and the Shah was more than happy to furnish the Kurds with extensive support. Before long, Iraq's problems were serious enough to bring them to the table, and Iran was able to negotiate over the Shatt al-Arab in exchange for them ending the support for the Kurds. In 1975, the Treaty of Algiers was signed, which fixed the border at the deepest point of the river, allowing Iranian ships to transit without entering Iraqi territory. Now it was Iraq's turn to feel aggrieved at being strong-armed, but with American support firmly behind the Iranians, there was little they could do about it. Until, in 1979, everything changed. But before we get to that, here's a quick word about the sponsor of today's video. If you're into kingdoms, strategy and legendary heroes, I've got something that you'll be interested in. You should stick around and I'll show you how to unlock exclusive rewards in this game called Raid Shadow Legends. What surprises me in Raid is just how much strategy is under the hood. It's not just collecting champions, it's combining abilities, balancing factions and roles, and picking the right tactics. Right now there's a huge global event called Web of Corruption. An ancient darkness has awakened in the Mistwood, and you can claim the legendary champion Vallaryn the Equalizer free just by logging in for 7 days. Start before July 31st. Keep logging in for 7 more days after this for extra gear. Vallaryn balances offense and support perfectly. Massive AoE damage that ignores defense, debuffs like Weaken and Leech, plus healing for allies. There's also a limited time event dungeon where you can challenge Raya the Mourned for valuable pinpoint gear. If you haven't started playing, now's a great time. Click the link or scan the QR code for an incredible starting bonus. Instantly unlock the legendary Karato Foxhunter. Get another legendary champion for free using one of these 6 promo codes. I'd personally recommend using Wrath to claim Grand Oak Padraig. Log in for 7 days to get Vallaryn free and hit level 15 for the epic champion Alure. That's 3 free legendary champions and 1 epic champion just for downloading using my link or QR code, which also helps support the channel. Thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. In January 1979, after months of economic and political turmoil inside Iran, the Shah was forced to flee amid massive protests. In the months afterwards, power in Iran passed to those favouring the establishment of a theocratic Islamic state, led by the Ayatollah Khomeini. This was disastrous news for the Iranian army, which had been loyal to the Shah and was massively distrusted by the new authorities. In the months after the Shah fled, 50% of the army deserted. The Iranian army's combat capability took a severe blow as a result. The large numbers of tanks, artillery, and aircraft unable to be deployed. Feeling emboldened, Iraq turned up the pressure. They copied Iran's own playbook from 5 years before, supporting separatist movements within Iran, including, ironically, the Kurds. In the oil province of Khuzestan in the southwest of the country, Saddam's government began to give lots of support to Arab separatists, those who would prefer to live under Iraqi rule. In April 1980, Iraqi intelligence arranged for 6 such separatists to storm the Iranian embassy in London. A 6-day siege ensued, culminating in one of the most famous hostage rescues of all time by the SAS. And as 1980 progressed, Iraqi and Iranian troops began to exchange fire, with sporadic skirmishes taking place up and down the border. When Iranian troops were seen by the Iraqis to be performing very poorly in these skirmishes, they began to believe that perhaps war was their best bet. In September, Saddam announced that Iraq was abrogating the 1975 Treaty of Algiers, telling his advisors, "Where we have the ability to return what is rightfully ours, we will do it." On September 23rd, after a preemptive air attack, 6 Iraqi divisions rolled across the border. In the north and centre of the country, the attacks were designed to establish a buffer zone and take up strong defensive positions, while the main weight of the attack was in the south. Here, Saddam hoped to make use of the flat, open terrain to win a decisive victory, with the oil refinery at Abadan in his sights. Little initial resistance was encountered, with the Iranian troops and civilian populations having largely been evacuated from border areas. Khorramshahr was the closest city to the Iraqi border, so its capture was expected by both sides to take place swiftly. It was not an especially important target itself, but troops advancing in the south would need to pass through it to get to Abadan and the larger city of Ahvaz. But despite the lack of resistance, the Iraqi advance towards the city was very slow. Ground units were only advancing after extensive artillery bombardment of any remaining Iranian positions in order to minimise casualties. Increasing harassment by the Iranian Air Force flying F-4 Phantoms was also not helping. It was a similar story in the north, with Iraqi columns advancing slowly. Local commanders had been given little idea of what the overall plan was or what areas were the most important to capture. It was as if Saddam expected the mere fact of his invasion to be enough to force the Iranians into concessions. In the south, the dawdling progress of the Iraqis gave time for the civilian population of Khorramshahr to be evacuated. Defending the city now were some Iranian Marines alongside various militia units. Chief among these were the Pasdaran, a group closely associated with Ayatollah Khomeini that would later be known as the Revolutionary Guards. They were light on both training and equipment, but made up for it in sheer determination to give Iraq a bloody nose. On September 28th, cautious about pushing into the urban areas which its troops were approaching, Iraq announced its acceptance of a proposed UN ceasefire, only to be surprised when this was rejected by Iran. Their reading of the new Iranian regime's attitude to the war had been completely wrong. Far from being weakened by it, Khomeini seized on the Iraqi aggression to consolidate power and rally patriotic enthusiasm behind him. No matter what the losses to Iraq were, there would be no negotiation. This resolve was a shock to Iraq, which now realised it would have to seize the territory it wanted by force, starting with Khorramshahr. On the night of September 29th, the Iraqis made their first attempt to enter the city, with special forces crossing the Shatt al-Arab and armoured forces attacking over land from the west. Iraqi tanks were ambushed by Pasdaran fighters in the narrow urban streets with small arms fire and anti-tank rockets. The Iraqi spearhead was almost entirely comprised of tanks, so with little infantry support available, they were unsuited to fighting house to house. This was a weakness the Iraqis had inherited from the Soviets, whose doctrine they had adopted almost wholesale. You can look back at 1956 in Budapest for how badly a force comprised mostly of tanks can struggle when fighting in an urban environment. This botched first attempt to take the city prompted a rethink by both sides. Up until this point, the Iranians had written the fall of Khorramshahr off as inevitable, but now they saw that a determined resistance here could seriously delay the Iraqi invasion and give them time to bring more troops up to the front. For the Iraqis, it was suddenly clear that they were going to have to fight their way into the city, and there would be no trying to minimise casualties anymore. Special forces and several regiments of infantry were brought up, and a concerted assault begun. Both sides deployed more artillery and air assets to the area, with Iranian F-4 Phantoms hitting Iraqi supply routes and Iraqi aircraft striking targets in the city. By the end of October 2nd, Iraq was in control of most of Khorramshahr's port area as well as the radio station, and the following day a massive battle was fought in the north of the city, where a major Iraqi armoured column was opposed by Iranian paratroopers supported by chieftain tanks. 5 Iraqi tanks and 10 APCs were knocked out, but the outnumbered Iranians were forced back nonetheless in heavy fighting. Having secured control of much of the north and west of the city, on October 5th Iraq again tried for a ceasefire, only to be rebuffed once again by the Iranians. Frustrated, the following day they pushed tanks and special forces into close quarters fighting towards the city centre. Iranian militia units fought tenaciously but were slowly pushed back, with fresh Iraqi reinforcements arriving in the area. Over the next 3 days, Iraq made grindingly slow progress, with every house and street fought for. By October 10th, the Iranians had almost no tanks left, but they still held the bridge across the river Karun to the southern part of the city, and much of the city centre was still in their hands. Frustrated by the slow progress and keen to get a victory quickly, that day Iraqi troops made a crossing of the river 30 miles north of the city using pontoon bridges. Iran tried to respond to the crossing and attacked with Sea Cobra helicopters armed with tow missiles, but it was too late. With a long overdue bit of urgency, Iraqi tanks swept to the southeast, cutting the road north to Ahvaz and threatening to encircle Khorramshahr. The situation for the defenders was now desperate. Up to 500 militia remained within the city, with little food, water or ammunition. Through the middle of October, Iraq began a painstaking operation to clear the rest of the city, a task which was finally completed around October 20th. It had been a hard-fought, weeks-long battle, costing both sides around 7,000 casualties. The Iraqi invasion had been badly delayed, and some of its best special forces units decimated by their involvement in Khorramshahr. A subsequent attack on Abadan was repulsed, and the Iraqi offensive ran out of steam. A war begun without a clear plan or victory condition in expectation of a swift capitulation had now deteriorated into a quagmire of Iraq's own making. Its best forces were battered and held up by vastly inferior forces. 8 years of war now stretched out ahead of them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.